today, and I think Matt covered some of this in his talk, and that's good to get a lead in here. I heard most of your talk, Matt, but when I finally was able to resuscitate my laptop, but I may have missed some of the stuff you covered. But it sounds like you did talk a little bit about BA2 and differences in case counts we've seen in countries that have seen a predominance of BA2. I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the global picture of BA2, and it is true that BA2 has really made its way around the world in about 80 days from the beginning of the year until now. It has become the dominant the dominant variant of COVID-19, supplanting BA1 and other Omicron variants relatively rapidly on a global scale. Again, it's been in some ways a little less predictable on a country by country or place by place basis, but when you look overall, its rise in predominance has been pretty dramatic here over the last 2 months, and that has translated into this resurgence in global case counts that we've seen here over the last several weeks. After that large Omicron, primarily BA1 spike, we've seen this resurgence that's driven by a number of different places, including Asia and Europe, and all of that is BA2. I think, as Matt pointed out, we've seen a pretty significant recurrence in case counts in the UK that corresponds with the rise of BA2 and also kind of the removal of the last vestiges of mitigation measures and non-pharmaceutical interventions in the UK. But that coinciding timing with the rise of BA2 predominance, and you can see from the arrow there that darker colored band is the proportion of BA2 sequenced from UK laboratory specimens, and BA2 is clearly predominating now, and that's been the case over the last month or so. The other thing to take into account is when you're looking at the impact of BA2 is to look at what the rate of vaccination and particularly the rate of boosting is in countries to understand the clinical impact of BA2. So I pulled up data that highlights the highest boosting rates in countries, and there are 9 countries around the world that have greater than 60% of their population with an additional dose or booster. So we would consider this now up to date on their vaccines. And you can see in these 9 countries, this is actually the US for reference. So as a point of reference for us, who are, we'll talk a little later, we are not in the top 9 or anywhere close in terms of people up to date on their vaccines. And you can see how that's translated in the US. We had a large spike in Omicron cases. As you can see, roughly 3-fold higher than case counts that we had seen previously. But our number of deaths that we experienced in Omicron were greater than the number of deaths we experienced in the Delta wave, and approached relatively close, about 80% of what we experienced in our largest wave a year ago. So not a significant decoupling, as we've talked about. If you look at these other countries, however, you can see that all of these top 9 have had a dramatic decoupling, where the Omicron case counts, you can see all clustered here on the far right in the top graph, all show dramatically higher rates of cases than they've previously experienced. And then on the bottom, you can see their rates of deaths dramatically lower. The one outlier here, which I'm not sure if this is just a data anomaly, is Chile. They've had a dramatic increase in reporting, at least over the last couple of days, based on these data from our World in Data, which is usually pretty accurate. So, but if you look at other reporting, this is from the Financial Times, which gets their data from Hopkins. You do not see this dramatic spike in deaths in Chile. So that's either a reporting artifact. They may have been batching a bunch of deaths and only got reported once in this system, or it may just be a complete outlier. It is worth noting, however, that Chile, of all of those countries, is the one that is boosted with a significant amount of Sinovac. So you can see that line kind of shows the last 2 to 3 months. And there's still a significant proportion of their vaccines being given that are the Sinovac Chinese vaccine. That's, again, the whole virus inactivated vaccine, which has much lower immunogenicity than the mRNA vaccines. And compare that to Uruguay, the other country in those top 9 that had a significant proportion of their vaccines as Sinovac, but they stopped the use of Sinovac last summer and haven't really vaccinated at all with that since then. And their most recent surge in vaccinations, so boosting doses, were all with Pfizer. So worth watching to see if that Chile data is real. And if so, then perhaps this would be an explanation. But getting back to the US, you can see that opposed to these countries, which had over 60% of their populations up to date with a third dose, we are down below 30 in such august company as Azerbaijan and Slovakia. And so that explains why we had that much lower rate of decoupling, really not nearly as dramatic a rate of decoupling as these other countries, and why in the future, as we've discussed previously, if we have a resurgence of cases, we will see even higher hospitalization and fatality rates because we are getting farther and farther out from people's last vaccine dose, and we're giving doses of vaccine now at a paltry level, I think lower than we have seen ever previously since vaccines were made available. Now going on to Hong Kong, where we've seen the most dramatic impact of BA2 for reasons we've explained previously. Hong Kong appears to have past their peak in cases and now deaths, which is good, but you can see there not a significant decoupling in Hong Kong. And again, that's because of their low vaccination rate, particularly in the elderly, and the fact that they have no background immunity from previous infection. Hong Kong, you can see, has been all BA2 really over the last 2 months, correlating with that large surge in cases and deaths. And so BA2 was clearly the cause there. And that leads us to mainland China now to look at where things are going there. As you remember, maybe from last time, China was approaching their total number of cases from their spring 2020 wave. They've dramatically surpassed that now and continue to be on a significant upward trajectory. And so it looks as if this BA2 outbreak in China is now really getting out of control. China has now, I think, put roughly 90 million citizens in some form of lockdown, either very draconian, dramatic lockdown, similar to what they did in Wuhan, or in a partial lockdown. But there is now, I think, real concern that China will have a Hong Kong-like experience. And again, as we've discussed last time, China looks a lot more like Hong Kong in terms of their rates of vaccination and boosting, particularly because their vaccines have essentially almost all been the Sinovac or similar vaccines that have much lower efficacy. And then great minds think alike. Matt, glad you covered some of the wastewater data. If you look nationwide, as folks have discussed over the last week, there are some concerning trends. However, they may not have made their way to Nebraska yet, but these data are from BioBot, which is a private company that's implemented wastewater treatment, as you can see, in 25 states across 180 communities. And over the last couple of weeks, you can see that the trend line has now been up, reversing itself from what was previously a significant downward trend in January and February. And if you look specifically, it appears that that is primarily in the Northeast that has had the most dramatic rise over the last couple of weeks. And not surprisingly, the Northeast has the highest proportion of BA2 in wastewater sequencing that's been tested. Again, you can see we're a few weeks behind in terms of the sequencing data and proportion of BA2. It is certainly much higher than that 19% in the Northeast that they saw now. And those data that you can see from the wastewater overall numbers is about a week behind. So you can assume that those curves are still going up, and we're probably going to be seeing an upswing soon in the other regions when their proportion of BA2 surpasses 20%. So the trends look similar to what we talked about last week, following in the footsteps of Europe, and we may have the next surge more quickly than we think. That's all I got.